wave of issues that are going to be covered here, given the fact that the ecosystem livelihoods linkages are extremely important for mangroves. On the other side, if we look at the biodiversity element, which has already been talked of in the very first session, it is not merely the rise in salinity that is leading to the changes in the ecosystem functions, but that is not merely having an impact on the flora itself, but also on the behavior of the fauna. The other side happens to be climate change and climate resilience, which is in the form of another ecosystem service, whether it is in the form of carbon sequestration or suppose the other regulating service in the form of moderation of extreme events, because it acts as some kind of a buffer. Of course, there are variable views on this. I distinctly recall Professor Sugato Hajra, who will be here, in fact, by the very next session, talking about the Sundarbans mangroves not really acting as, given their height, it cannot really protect us from storms, but from storm surges. But in any case, when you have mangroves as buffer, that by itself creates some kind of distance of the source and the destination or the impacted human community. So let me first come to Mr. Rai for his initial interventions. So what we will do is, we have three panelists, Mr. Debal Rai, Professor Jayanta Bandyopadhyay, and Mahjabeen Khaled, who is former member of parliament of the Awami League Bangladesh, joining virtually. So we will have the initial interventions from these panelists for around 5 to 7 minutes, not exceeding 7 minutes, of course. And then after that, we, if we have time, we get into the second round, or we will directly get into the question and answer. So, Mr. Rai, it's over to you.
Thank you, and please alert me when I am 5 minutes over. Yeah, because this is a subject that we have a lot to talk about, and most of us are passionate about this, so we tend to exceed the time limit. Now, since it is all about mangroves, I will start with the mangroves and then move to the climate change aspect that is affecting it. The first thing that I would like to flag is what is really killing our mangroves. There are a number of factors that are affecting it. The first thing, it is not the climate change at this moment which is killing the mangroves. So it's probably the conversion of mangroves for other land usage, like the vedis. As Prabhat Mr. Saab has pointed out and shown in his picture, that there is a lot of mangrove outside the legal forest areas of Sundarban. Now, legal forest areas are inviolate. Nobody can go there and cut down and convert the area into a vedi. But there are mangroves there are a lot of mangroves under the private ownership. The need of the hour is to stop them, or as someone said, that to create a economic incentive so that even if they go for other land usage, it should be integrated with the mangrove, like, what should I say, mangrove cum fishery, things like that. Second thing that is killing mangrove is the reduced sweet water supply. Now, all the sweet water or the fresh water that flows from Ganga passes through the westernmost boundary. Just imagine the delta, westernmost boundary of the Sundarban, that is through the Sagar. So it doesn't really enter into the mainstream areas of the Indian Sundarban. Now, we very fondly call it GBM Delta, Ganga, Brahmaputra and Meghna Delta, but Ganga really doesn't feed this Indian part of Sundarban. It flows, it marks the westernmost boundary of it. Now, where from the freshwater supply comes? The freshwater supply used to come from the different smaller rivers that originated inland within India and Jharkhand and flew into the Indian part of Sundarban. What happened? I had a fantastic detailing. I read it in the famous IUCN publication that was written by Rai Chaudhary and Chaudhary. In that, they have listed from 1980s till now, what are the barriers that were created that hindered the flow of fresh water from the mainland into the Sundarban Delta. So not only we are not getting the fresh water from the Ganga, but we are also creating obstacles, Tali, Nala, you name so many, you know most of them. All these structures which are cutting across the flow of water, southward movement of the water, they are really depriving the freshwater flow. Now, a, a delta without, a mangrove delta without freshwater is nothing. Means there are certain species which would be encouraged and there are certain species which would be decimated. So that is one. Second is, of course, I will come to the sea level rise. That is something which is affecting moderately to very moderately at event, but it in another 5 years to 7 years, it would be the sole determining factor for the fate of the mangroves. The way sea level was rising when I started the climate change cell in Government of West Bengal in Environment Department, at that time the first assessment we projected it will be 2 point something. That would be the future SLR here. Now we crossed 4.3. And add to it the ground level subsidence, and you can imagine the kind of freshwater, kind of salinity ingress or sea level rise that we are looking at. Now, the sediment accumulation, in order for the mangroves to thrive, the sediment accumulation that is taking place must keep in pace with the sea level rise, which is a globally accepted phenomenon. We in Sundarbans, with the help of Geography Department of Calcutta University, we have placed certain probes which are measuring at which rate the sea level, sediment is being deposited and whether it will be able to keep pace with the SLR or not. Now, again, we do not exactly know what is the exact rate of SLR. The satellite altimetry thing, which precisely measures the sea level rise with respect to the center of the earth, that instrument is lacking there. So probably the situation will change if Akshita ji helps us through a project or something. But the present situation is like that. We do not know precisely where the situation is. Now the next question comes. What? Yeah, quickly. 5 minutes. 5 minutes over. Oh my God. I have, okay. Okay. The other things that are really needed for mangroves to survive is the tidal flow. Mangroves deadly needs a tidal flow. It cannot live in a static water. Okay, so lot of barriers that are created for shrimp culture and this and that, for reclamation, for other land uses, they really are killing the mangroves. The need of the hour, so I'll be quick. The need of the hour is to identify the drivers which are really killing the mangroves and try to make changes as far as possible. Now, I respectfully disagree with the comment that was made by some authority who said, oh, Professor Hajra is a good friend of mine, but we have disagreements in most of the matters. Mangrove does make a huge impact in reducing the storm surges and the wind effect and protecting the hinterland, particularly Kolkata and other agglomerates. It's a huge ecosystem service. You need not be a theoretical scientist in order to appreciate, or need not do any laminar flow kind of thing. You just visit Sundarban after any major storm, and you will see how the trees have been flattened and taken the first blow of the wind and protected the hinterland. So I'm quickly go through the other things that I propose to take. The rise in temperature, the rise in aerial temperature, nobody talks about it, but it is also another concern. For example, the mangrove species, most of them do not photosynthesize after 38 to 42 degrees Celsius. And we are fast reaching that range during the summer months. So that is another area of concern, and unfortunately, we cannot do anything about it. So this is the last thing that I used to say, that we cannot really manage Sundarban as an integral unit. It is not one unit. I said it once again, that Sundarban is a heterogeneous assemblage of areas where vulnerabilities are different. We cannot really keep or save all the islands equally. We have to make a strategy by stratifying the islands, that what kind of intervention is needed where, and we need a holistic approach. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Professor Hajra should have been here and we could have had a nice debate on that. And in any case, I think one very interesting thing that came out was that we need to have a more disaggregated approach to managing the Sundarbans. And that is in opposed to when we talk about integrated approach to managing the Sundarbans as an ecosystem. So that is also something new that came up in your intervention. Before I come to Professor Bandyopadhyay, who I presume will be providing a more holistic aspect of governance of the delta and the mangroves, I would like to move to Mahjabeen. More so because she's from the other side of the border, and given the fact that she has been looking at governance and policy as far as the mangroves and the delta are concerned. So Mahjabeen, it's over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh. Good morning to everybody. It's my privilege, and I'd like to thank ORF Kolkata for inviting me here today. It's a very important issue, mangrove, and I'm proud today everybody is talking about Bangladesh and mangrove. Because of mangrove, I think people are more aware of Bangladesh. Even I have heard the Council General of France talking about visiting Bangladesh because of the mangrove, you know. It's strange that I haven't, all these years, I haven't been to the forest, the mangrove, the Sundarbans. And this year I did travel to Sundarban, and it was an amazing experience. But because I'm not a professor or I am not a researcher, I cannot tell you in depth about the things our panelists are going to discuss, but I'm going to talk about more like the governance, what Mr. Ghosh just said, and the legal policy and the political commitments. As you know, I have been a member of parliament in 2014 to 2018, and there have been a lot of work done on this, on climate change and environment, and especially on mangrove. We have a separate ministry, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So we have passed a lot of policies, but once I was out of the parliament, I realized when you go to the grassroots level, even if you have so many policies, the grassroots level scenario is totally different, because there's a big gap. You know, the grassroots level people are not aware of what is actually happening or what policies they have, what are the acts, what are the plans, what are the projects. They have no knowledge of that. So I think in a way it's an eye-opening thing, because I had to sit in the parliament to see passing of these policies, and then again go back to the grassroots level and see what is happening right now. Other panelists already discussed about the erosion, the flood, the rising sea level, cyclones, lack of awareness, human and wildlife conflict, the agriculture expansion. These have been already discussed. But if we look at the success stories, you know, the mangrove, there is mangrove in the Indian side too, and other places like in Thailand a little bit, and in Vietnam. If we look at the Vietnam's Khao Mu province, they have successfully implemented mangroves for the future. That project they have initiated, and it was this initiative has led to the restoration of mangrove, providing protection against coastal erosion and supporting local fisheries. So this can be an example to we can learn from there and take that project in hand for our mangrove in Bangladesh. There is another one, Coral Triangle Initiative, which was done in Philippines. The mangrove ecotourism in Thailand, and India. You have mangrove there, and India has implemented integrated coastal zone management plans that include mangrove conservation. This holistic approach considers the ecological, social, and economic aspects of coastal areas, promoting sustainable development. This is very important because anything happens to mangrove in Bangladesh, it is actually has effect in India. So we can take knowledge, we can have the knowledge sharing there from this. And there's a policy enforcement in Myanmar. A report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature highlights challenges of policy enforcement in Myanmar, indicating that only a fraction of fines for illegal mangrove clearing and collected due to limited enforcement capacity. So when coming back to when I was visiting mangrove, there were like some of the things I have noticed, which was we didn't see any tigers there, and actually it's not even about the tigers, not even any animal. So there has been a reduce of endangered animals, even the birds, very less, because we were in a boat talking to the local people, and they said there has been a reduction of that. And as the High Commissioner of Bangladesh, Deputy High Commissioner of Bangladesh, Andalip Ilyas said, the Sundari trees, it has reduced a lot. That has been discussed also. And every time there is attack on people who are going to the mangrove for collecting trees for logging and fuel collection. So they're not aware that there are endangered animals there, and they are actually going there, risking their lives. And every other day there is something happening, some kind of incident. So there is lack of awareness in the local community. So when you provide a policy, when you think about some project, you have to include the community. Unless the community is on board, you cannot just sit in Dhaka and just prepare a policy. So that's another one thing we need to think. And second of all, political commitment and willingness. Though the government is trying, but in the local level, there are a lot of political leaders who do not think about reserving the mangrove. And it is not only mangrove, any kind of forest, because there were like in the papers, there were some news, like they are just taking a forest, that they just, we call it dokhol. I don't know what is the English word of dokhol. They just take it over, without any papers, nothing, because this is government property. They just take it over. So this has to stop, and there has to be a lot of political commitment. And for this reason, we have to take on board the political leaders. Even if they are on the opposition side or they are with the government, doesn't matter. The political leaders has to be on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahjabeen.
Thank you.
We heard from Bangladesh, India, and let me now come to Professor Bandyopadhyay. So if we look at the mangroves holistically, they need to be, I presume that this is something that you have been propagating over the years, that we cannot look at mangroves in isolation. So we have to look at that critical interface of the blue economy and the freshwater economy. So can you just throw your perspective on that?
Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, Mr. Debal Roy, other colleagues in the panel and future panels, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with the issue I've been, and many of us have been struggling to bring to public notice. And I am afraid that that gap still remains in the discussion so far, which I would like to draw your attention to, is that finance accelerates a process which gives a high priority to engineering without a necessarily strong ecological knowledge base. Till yesterday early morning, I was in Uttarakhand on a field visit where a tunnel collapse had put 41 people alive for quite some time. Some of them have been taken out. Yeah. The tunnel collapse has become an issue of mass hysteria in Uttarakhand because so many roads are being built, so many hydropowers are going on, and so many tunnels are being constructed. And that tunnel collapse is not necessarily a collapse of the tunnel, but in the mountain sort of slopes, it is a collapse of the landmass. So there is a constant question I faced, how do you see this? And I said, this is high priority to engineering, which is a profit factor, and low priority to ecological knowledge, which is a cost factor. So when finance is there, finance cannot be sustainable on a poor ecological knowledge base. It has to be based on not good engineering alone. Engineering is important, but what is more important is the ecological base of that engineering. And here also so far, we have not seen that sort of attention, alert, and recognition of the necessity of the ecosystemic understanding of the delta. What is, we are talking of small aspects, human dimension, we are talking of the three species mix, we are talking of little sediment here, the little erosion there, but that, in my opinion, is not big enough and good enough. What we need is a complete ecosystemic picture of the Sundarbans, not only that there is less fresh water. Yes, it is true. And together with that comes less sediment. Together with that comes a changed base for biodiversity. So we talk of the sea level rise. The whole delta is based on a higher inflow of sediment from the inner parts of the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna river basin, and a lower, if there has been any sea level rise, lower extent of sea level rise. That's how the whole delta has, over millions of years, expanded towards the south. I mean, we must get this ecological completeness of the whole delta as one of the basic sort of pillars on which how to address what to do, when to do, where we can do this can be worked upon. Now, there was a comment that climate change vis-a-vis or against the human dimension. Climate change is definitely affecting the whole of the Sundarban ecosystem. But we are talking of the human interventions, and it is only the complete understanding, complete and integrated understanding would put how much of climate change is even invigorating the human dimension. It is not that climate change and human dimension are two separate elements working on the mangrove forests. Now, there was a mention of the ecosystem services. Ecosystem services of any ecosystem, of course, first is provisioning. And for thousands of years, and maybe more intensely, last 200 or 300 years, the provisioning ecosystem services of the mangroves, particularly we have heard of Sundari tree and other timber species, they have provided that or fulfilled that ecosystem service of provisioning. There was a suggestion from Dr. Ghosh about fishery, and I think we have to go into the whole supporting ecosystem services of the mangroves. It's not purely provisioning. It is not. It is. We have some understanding of the sort of regulating role of. There could be distinction or difference between the regulating role as seen by Mr. Debal or Dr. Hazara, but there is a regulating role. We know that. There is a cultural role, of course. We know so many people go to the Sundarbans. Right now it is getting crowded, and by December it will be overcrowded. The issue of supporting is not always very clearly understood by us. What is being supported? And one of the major supporting role is the fisheries, support to fishery, particularly in the areas where there is quite a bit of mud, liquid mud combined. So what I wish to sort of stress is that this meeting may come out with a strong demand for ecosystemic picture of the totality of the Sundarbans, and including its history, particularly the history of the East India Company's organized deforestation. Because unless we know the whole ecological history of rapid changes, we cannot understand the present day challenges. The rapid changes of deforestation brought in rapid demographic change. Rapid demographic change in turn affects the forests, because that provisioning role has to be fulfilled for a larger and larger population continuously. Is the time, what, 5 or 7? Which?
7 is up.
7 is up, okay. Tomorrow we are having the conference of the parties of the FCCC starting. And does it go along the way of the last 27, or it really becomes an effective tool for clear, legally binding resolutions? Because we really cannot wait anymore. And I think every year we have this hope of the global population before the conferences of the parties, and then disappointment of the global population. And I think the Sundarbans has to take the lead in the global negotiation in COP28, that all mangrove forests, all countries having mangrove forests unitedly brings in a clear strategy for the Sundarbans, which will then flourish local level strong steps. So I think it's very interesting if we can today ask the COP28 and the countries having large mangrove forests to sort of unite and take the whole challenge of the rapidly decreasing mangrove forests into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. And of course, that was a very strong call for having a better ecosystemic understanding or broader ecosystemic understanding of the delta, considering the mangroves as a component of it, because this entire process is a flow. It's not merely a static structure, static natural infrastructure. That's not what the mangroves are all about. So in any case, I'm sure that as far as the supporting services are concerned, Saudamini, you are going to speak about the mangrove fishery linkages in the very next session when we talk about the blue carbon element as well. Now, this interactivity becomes very important. The freshwater, the saline water, and the mangroves in between, which makes it a brackish water ecosystem. Now, the phenomenon is not specific, especially as Sundarbans or India is concerned. In fact, if you go to our, say, the western frontiers, you find the same kind of phenomenon. In fact, Saudamini, you have worked on the Orissa mangroves in the Bay of Bengal. The phenomenon of sea level rise and agricultural destruction is also prevalent, in fact, in the Colorado Delta. It's the same phenomenon. Freshwater decline, coastal ecosystem decline, sea level rise, salinity intrusion is the same phenomenon that is happening in Indian Sundarbans. The same phenomenon is happening in the lower Colorado Delta in Mexico. So there has to be, when we are putting this entire call from the perspective of the Indo-Pacific, it has to be a voice of the low-lying areas, a voice from the mangroves. Because at this point in time, we have to create the mangroves as a stakeholder in the global negotiation process. So I think what we'll do is we directly go to the floor, we open it up to the floor. And let us have a few questions to which the three panelists can respond to. So, Saudamini, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nilanjan. I think it was a wonderful session, and I think one point that I really loved in your speech, the heterogeneity in the plurality. You talk about the mangrove as the entire ecosystem, that you really need to look into mangrove as one. And whereas Debal, you made the point that if you want to come for conservation, then you have to go for the micro level. So a divisional, like a small disaggregated approach is better. So how do you maintain a balance between these two, the whole versus the small?
Debal sir and to Bandyopadhyay sir, I have two questions for each of you. Sir, we understand the situation in mangroves is not an immediate consequence of the climate change. So in such a situation, how do we build a holistic resilience where we have the fear of unknown as well as the current issue which are dwindling the situation of mangroves? And for Bandyopadhyay sir, my question is, you mentioned a lot about a regulatory role. Do we have any examples which can be used or which can be replicated in terms of mangroves from other areas in the Indo-Pacific?
So I think most of the questions are with Mr. Ray and Professor Bandyopadhyay. And Mahjabeen, I will come to you for some of your concluding remarks. Fine. Mr. Ray.
Yeah. So I think three questions. One is modular approach versus the holistic approach. The second was on how to build resilience of mangroves. And the third was a very interesting thing of, I'll come to that. That would be really funny. Regarding that segregated approach versus the area-specific approach, I think I am not understood properly. It doesn't alter the fact that the whole Sundarban, irrespective of political boundary, is just one landscape and one ecosystem. whenever we are thinking about managing an ecosystem, making intervention to make it more resilient, things like that, then there is one approach. There is no doubt about that. But the physical condition of the different islands constituting the landscape are different. Some of them are very exposed, vulnerabilities are very high. Some of the areas are relatively sheltered, protected. In some areas, salinity ingress is high. If you see those factors into consideration, then for management interventions, you need to make a segregation. That look, these are the islands where for future I would try to make sediment trap, as this gentleman is doing, so that we can raise the height of the islands. There are areas where these are really freshwater starved. So what we can do to address the freshwater problem? So we are addressing the whole, but in a region specific manner. Probably I explained that. Second is how to build resilience. Well, this is what we propose to do. Look, a resilience of ecosystem firstly depends on its physical vulnerability, that is the vulnerability due to salinity ingress, seawater rise, freshwater flows, hindrance, these kind of things, which should be, some of them can be addressed, some of them probably cannot be addressed. The second resilience building is through preserving the genetic diversity. Okay. Now, this I cannot really overemphasize this point, that Sundarban has the highest diversity of mangroves, and about 7 or 8, I forgot the number, are RET species, globally RET species, rare, endangered and threatened species. Now, we need to have some ex situ conservation measure for these RET species, and for all the species, all 78 or 73 mangrove species, there is a huge disagreement among the taxonomists. What is mangrove, what is true mangrove, what is new mangrove? I will not go into details. Let us take 70 odd mangrove species are there. For each of them, there is not a single community. There are many communities. And if you know a little bit, I am sure you know, sorry, that was a wrong statement. You know that for in a species, as many communities are there, so many diversities are there. So we not only should address the conservation of the species, we should also try to conserve the communities. If we try to do that, then the genetic heterogeneity is maintained. If genetic heterogeneity is maintained, then it can protect against viral attack, it can protect against higher temperature, it can protect itself against salinity stress, because certain genes will definitely be found there which has these properties. So these are the two approaches of building a resilience. Regarding tiger and salinity, I really love this topic. And as many experts are there, and like I can float a theory today also, there is no basis for that. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no basis that tigers are smaller because they drink salty water. Tigers are eating smaller animals. Tigers are straying out because there is no prey. All these are untrue. I respectfully say that. Now, if you see the genetic composition of tiger population, there are 4 subpopulations, and Sundarban is one of them. Okay, so the morphological characteristics manifest because of the genetic composition. Okay, so whether they have high blood pressure because of drinking salt water, well, at least I do not know, and there is no published literature, and I know pretty sure that there is no research also. Okay, I would like to say that some of them say there is no prey, that's why they are coming out in the human population. Now, if you look at what time this straying takes place, it takes place in winter, the breeding season. That is the time when male tigers cross across huge distances in search of a mate. And in the process, they dislodge the territorial tigers who may be a little old, or maybe not so strong, and that's when it happens. Then these tigers gets stray into the periphery. So, sir, I would respectfully say that propagating this kind of things in absence of any physiological study is totally unscientific. Thank you. Sir.
Yeah, I respond to the issue of how much of the human population should be, or what aspect of the human population should be taken into consideration. I think humans are integral part of the ecosystem, and all their activities, all their consumption are to be considered in an ecosystemic picture. There is no escape. And nature doesn't allow you to do that. Climate change, global warming and climate change are the excellent example. Whether humans close their eyes to the global warming, it is going to happen. And global warming is going to have serious impact on all ecosystems, and particularly the mangrove ecosystems or deltaic ecosystems. So my answer is that you cannot escape this consideration of human intervention. One thing that we have not yet discussed is an issue of adaptation, which the WWF report mentioned had been talking about, is managed retreat. That adaptation is not necessarily a technical issue, but also a demographic issue. And there is a lot of literature already published that one human consideration, we said you have to include it. In some aspects, a good adaptation would say the humans have to retreat from the vulnerable areas where their future is uncertain. The state has to provide them with a more secure future. And I think the whole issue of adaptation through managed transfer of population is something we have not, it's very difficult to actually put in practice, but it is important to consider that.
There was a question from regulating services.
Could I have the question again? In the
You will be audible.
yeah. No, can you use the mic?
Let's take the microphone.
Yeah.
So you mentioned regarding the regulation policy, but I understand that the governments always struggle to find what is the best regulation to be employed in such areas. So do you have any concrete examples or success stories of regulation which can be replicated in the regions with the mangrove pressure?
Well, when I talked about regulation, it is the ecosystem service of regulation and regulating some of the natural processes, including here the issue of tidal waves and storm surges. And this is where there was a reported difference between the view of Dr. Hajra and Mr. Ray. So are you mentioning a regulatory institution or an ecological regulation?
Regulating services.
Regulating services, yes. So what is the question? I have described the...
No, are there any replicable practices of regulating services which can be augmented here? If I'm correct. Which we are not acknowledging, or maybe in the case of Amazon, or need not be mangroves, but whatever ecosystem.
Well, the payment for ecosystem services in the upland-lowland relations is a regulating service. You regulate the flow of a river from upland to the lower plains, and you have an institutional setup either in cash or in kind or in many ways. You settle the continuity, that is the regulation or regulatory flow of water downstream. So this payment for ecosystem services is now practiced in many parts of the world. And I think that's a very good example of regulation.
Now, I will take your question. There's a question online, and I will also take your question. This is a question from Samakshi. Is it possible to provide a rough figure of how many people depend on Sundarbans and nearby mangroves outside protected area directly? And you ask your question now. Take the mic.
So, given in the next decade, are we looking into a dynamic zoning of the park? Just a thought.
Okay. Is it possible to provide a rough estimate of the number of people depending on the Sundarbans and nearby mangroves outside the protected area directly? That means on provisioning services. Okay.
This is easy. Means there are roughly 5 million people who depend on this directly, but indirectly lot many more. Okay. Regarding your question, whether you are going to see it, yes. The first step in doing that is knowing the terrain, isn't it? The elevation. So we are planning for a LiDAR survey to know exactly how, what is the elevation of each and every island, and that would be the base point of our zoning the islands. And based on that, we'll plan further. Since you are working over there, you will be involved.
Okay. Mahjabeen, let me come to you for your final comments before we end this session. You can take 2 minutes if there is anything to comment on the various discussions and the questions that we had so far.
Thank you again. I just wanted to mention that River Conservation Commission has been working on mangrove, and it is working with India. So I think these kind of engagement is very important, and there should be more research. And when you do the research, technology tools should be used, because nowadays satellite images are very important, and sharing the data, because we need to share the data. Most of the time in Bangladesh, we cannot progress because we don't have the actual data in our hand. So data sharing is another important issue I like to mention. And the bilateral and regional dialogues, very important. Like now the marine boundary is well established after demarcation with Myanmar and India. So our knowledge about resources availability in these areas are very limited. So more research, exploration, and extensive activities are needed to develop and understand the most sustainable use of these resources. And another thing I wanted to mention, that when Bangladesh introduced the 65-day fishing ban in 2015, it was a very important step towards conserving fish stocks and encouraging sustainable fishing process. However, this ban has brought about new issues that demand attention and require team efforts to ensure the well-being of coastal communities who are directly affected by the ban. The lack of coordination and enforcement between Bangladesh and India undermines the purpose of the ban. Addressing the challenges faced the coastal fisheries also requires international cooperation, and I already said engaging in bilateral dialogues. And the last thing I want to mention, the protecting mangrove not only safeguards fisheries, but also contributes a broader ecosystem health and resilience. So to conclude, we must recognize the problem first place and then find the solution. Climate resilient, biologically diverse, and green Bangladesh. Needless to say, it is evident that climate change is no longer a myth and that we are losing our national resources. Both are happening very rapidly and simultaneously. Therefore, biodiversity and climate change need to be reviewed through an integrated lens in Bangladesh. Thank you.
So with that, unless there is anything final that you would like to state, we come to the end of this particular session. I think there have been a host of options that have been talked of. Some very interesting discussions took place. Now, there is a framework, there is a model as far as Sundarbans are concerned, whether we talk about the Indian Sundarbans and the Bangladesh Sundarbans. Now, Sundarbans is unique. There's no doubt about that. In terms of the challenges, that is more so because you have the human element here, you have all the developmental challenges here, which are getting aggravated by the environmental challenges. And of course, further by climate change. So how do we essentially combat this challenge? And why is Sundarbans important in the context of the Indo-Pacific? That is what we need to highlight on. The Sundarbans is important in the Indo-Pacific more so because you won't find any other case across the Indo-Pacific where the challenges are so stark, where you have extreme poverty, extreme impacts of climate change, organic adaptation, because salinity intrusion is happening. That is why in many cases, the paddy fields are getting converted to fisheries and pisciculture. And at the same time, the very criticality of the ecosystem livelihood linkage, which we cannot ignore out here. On the other side, there are a host of opportunities which remain untapped. Now, what are those opportunities? I think somebody talked about the value chain, exploiting the value chain and creating market linkages. The massive natural capital that rests out there remain untapped. Now, it is not that the natural capital only is something that can be the basis of an economy. That is only one of the bases of the economy. What is important is creating the concomitant physical capital or the physical linkages in the process, and exploiting the existing human capital. As Mr. Ray mentioned, 500,000 is the size of the population. According to 2011 census, it was 4.5, right? So if that turns out to be the size of the population, there hasn't been any attempt in terms of reskilling this entire population to cater to the needs of the broader service sector that is emerging in and around the growing urban centers. And more importantly, they're still sticking to the land. What can be, in fact, the land-based services that can grow given the massive potential of this natural capital? So the opportunities are galore. How do we exploit that is not merely a policy question, but it is essentially a policy decision which has to be supplemented and complemented by managerial efficiency. And that is where, in fact, the system is lacking. So with that, we come to the end of this particular session, and we will move to the next session. And thank you for an excellent discussion. The panelists were excellent, so I presume that they deserve a big round of applause from the audience in here, both offline and online. And the audience also deserves the applause for themselves. I don't know, let me applaud for them for being an excellent listener and for excellent questions. Thank you so much.